So we're studying the church in the Bible on Sundays, and we just began. So we introduced the church and some of the ideas and what local church versus universal church, the purposes, why churches were formed. Speaking of local church, when I use it in the plural, obviously, and what they were doing. Today we're going to talk about unity in the church, and by implication, what's not unity. I have So we've got some scripture on the right-hand side that I didn't put on the slides. So, what did I forget?
I forgot the talking stick.
Oh, the talking stick. That's right. You guys get to see the talking stick. The boom mic. Talking about unity, this is a typical way, and I think a good way to get the juices flowing. List ways that a group of people can be united. We're not talking about church, we're just talking about human beings. What are some ways human beings can be united?
Shared values.
Okay, any kind of shared value. Where I value something, Blake values the same thing, we can be united in that. Okay?
I immediately thought in love. United in love.
United in love. Okay, that might be a value. Love for something, love for someone.
Definitely from a scriptural perspective
Okay.
in my mind, but yes, it is absolutely a value.
Okay, united in love from a scriptural perspective, or even the world's perspective, and using a bad definition of love, they may be united. Sorry?
I love the Atlantic United.
Love for Atlanta United. Then we're united in our love of United. That's right.
So with some of your questions, like if you have a longer, I noticed with your questions, like people might just have short little answers.
Yeah.
If you have a longer one, just let me know and I'll come over and speak in the mic.
Yeah, if you've got more than just a one or two word thing, raise your hand so we can get you on the mic for the people at home.
Shared relationships.
Okay, united in relationships. So I'm born into a family. I didn't make a choice, but I'm united in that family. I may not be united in spirit or mental ways at all. I may be separated from me even physically, but I'm united in a way that I didn't choose. I am part of that family. I'm part of that blood. So that's another way. That's something I wanted to bring out. We can be united against our will, and we can be united in ways that we didn't choose, and we can be united in ways that repulse us or repel us, right? I don't want to be, related to those people. Well, you are, right? Yeah. What other ways?
I'll say it. I was going to say, I think the sports one is funny because we can all be united by Atlanta United, but Blake likes Alabama, I like Georgia. So even though we're united in one sport and event, we're very divided in another one.
Yeah. So if you take sports as a whole, it can be something that unites and divides the same people. Yeah. So you would say that's not really a fundamental unity in that sense. It's more of just a superficial unity. Yeah.
So I just remember hearing guilt by association when I was younger,
Mm-hmm.
which means that you can be united to people, and you said good, bad, or amoral. Everything, including Atlanta United, is so far a good reason to be united that we talked about. But like a bad reason or bad way is they're doing bad things. Like you have a group of people that commit a crime, and everyone in the car is going to jail. That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So that was another one I had in mind when I put this up here is you can have people engaged in any kind of crime, right? Economic, white collar. I mean, whatever. Any kind of crime. These people have a common cause, and the cause can be bad. Well, they're still united, right? We don't laud that unity. We don't say, "Oh man, look how united they are," and they're an example for all of us to follow.
They are partners in crime.
Right. Yeah. So,
Richard, sometimes you hear about
Oh.
people that, that's maybe one of them. Sometimes you hear about people that have survived a disaster together, and they have a really tight bond after that because they've had this shared experience. It doesn't have to be traumatic necessarily, the shared experience, but it seems that the more extreme the experience, the tighter the bond between the people that experienced it.
yeah, and that, again, that's a unity they didn't choose, but it's a unity they often seek to maintain. It's formed against their will because they were all put through it. But then it's something that because they persevered through it and they survived it or got to the other side of it, that they do seek to maintain it. It is something that is a good thing, even though the event that created it may not have been a good thing. Yeah.
Just to that point, the steamship accident I was mentioning earlier, there were groups of survivors that got together and you met for years until 1920 something, I think was the date. But they met both in the North and the South, and the explosion happened with prisoners of war who were being transferred back and forth. So there was a unity of survivors, but then there was a disunity in that there were two different groups of survivors who met separately because of the conflict of the nation.
Yeah.
It's weird how these things all kind of work together and against each other, and it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, so I think we're touching on the second part of this question. Are there inherently good, bad, amoral ways to be united? We talked about crime, right? I have a goal of taking something that is not mine illegally, and I'm looking for people to join me in that. And if I find some people to join me in that, we're united in crime. Okay, that's an objectively or inherently bad way to be united. Good ways, because we talked about love. Okay, I'm united in love, right? That's a really generic, but it's good. Everyone agrees love is in amoral ways, right? So sports, there's no morality attached if you're doing it right. If you do it wrong, there can only be bad morality attached to sports. There can't be good morality. If you're doing it right, it's amoral. It's like, okay, I've got, some time to burn on Saturday. I'm going to go watch, a game with some friends, and we're going to be united in cheering for the same team, wearing the same colors, right? Whatever, suffering the same defeat, right? Whatever, we're united in that. It's an amoral thing. It's a unity, but it has nothing to do. So, do churches employ these things? And I use the word church accommodatively. Any group that calls itself a church. Do churches actively employ ways to unify their members? I see yeses, okay. So the unwritten question is, what are some examples? Good, bad, amoral.
The coffee shops at the mega church is one that just always struck me as an unusual partnership.
Okay, so bringing in from the outside world methods of association, right? I like to go to a coffee shop and have a discussion and just sit down and chat. For me, a coffee shop, a cup of coffee in my hand, a muffin or something, just conducive to having a nice, relaxing talk. So churches are bringing coffee shops into their buildings and putting coffee shops back there saying, okay, we're going to build unity among our members, and we're going to encourage them to come here early and have chats and talk with each other in the building. And that will build some unity. All right? Other ways.
I say scheduled worship service is a way to be united to a group of people.
Okay, we don't meet at 3 a.m. because that would create disunity here. Right? We try to pick a time where people are not working, people are, maybe it's before their work, maybe it's after their work, whatever. We pick a time, and not just we, churches, right? Pick a time where the members can gather and they can be physically, right, united together in worship. And then spiritually, hopefully, too, right? Singing, right? We had the songs here, right up here on this screen, so that we could all be united. And in fact, that screen was being broadcast through electrons all over the world, so that anybody could be united with us in singing the same song on the same notes, same tempo, right? So singing unites churches.
Separated Bible classes, like, unites within the greater unity, like it unites smaller groups together.
Okay, so sometimes within the church, there's ways to create smaller groups for support amongst themselves. You know, college-age kids are going through the same problems. If you have a college-age class, you can discuss some of those problems. Some of the kids say, "Oh, I didn't know other people were having the same issue," right? So you can create some unity among college-age, or, you know, as an example, ages, single versus married classes, right? Single classes. Teach spouses how to be spouses and teach them how to rely on each other. Yeah. So I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not even going to ask that question. I want to answer it because we're going to answer that later. I'm not going to talk about the methods that we just discussed as whether they're good, bad, or amoral methods yet. What we're going to look at is what is supposed to unite members of a local church. And I'm not going to discuss unity of the universal church because I can't affect that. I can be part of that, or I can separate myself from that, but Jesus determines who is in the universal church exactly when they need to be in the universal church, and he determines when they need to be out of the universal church exactly when they need to be out of the universal church. I can't influence that. I can separate myself, like I said, but I can't influence. I can make people stumble. I can do that. I can trip people up. And Jesus says, "Woe to the man by whom stumbling blocks come." So again, I'm affecting myself as well. But I want to look at the churches in Revelation 2 and 3. And I sent this out on Friday. I hope that was enough time. I'd actually meant to send it out on Thursday, but I forgot because I wanted you guys to read Revelation 2 and 3 and look at those churches and what's going on in those churches so that we could get to question 2, which is, what types of unity or division do you see in the churches addressed in Revelation 2 and 3? Is this a longer one?
Yes.
Tim was very quick. Yes, this is a longer one.
Well, I don't really know, so I think it was easier to say yes, so I knew I had the, and it would make Blake work.
It's already long.
Yeah. The churches and their responses to false teaching, specifically the Nicolaitans. So I think Ephesus was positive. There was the negative one, which was, I believe, was it Philadelphia. One of them responded negatively to Nicolaitans, but there was a response in unity, at least, to false teaching specifically. Also, I mean, even Philadelphia with the synagogue of Satan, I think about, there's a unified response to the false teaching in that particular church.
Yeah, so there's a mix of unity in some of these letters as far as accepting bad teaching or rejecting bad teaching, or accepting good teaching and rejecting good teaching.
I don't think that they're all on the same page, whether good or bad.
Yeah, so if you look in Revelation 2 at the message to Pergamum, there's some division here over the Nicolaitans. If you look at verse 15. So you also have some who in the same way, right, some. So there's a division in the church in Pergamum because there are some who hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans, right? I was looking for the other. I lost the other Nicolaitan.
Ephesus. Chapter 2.
Verse 6.
I should have had it highlighted.
2:6.
Yeah, so he commends Ephesus that because there's no division, right? He's talking to the church as a whole. You hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. So let me ask this. Do you think these divisions and this unity is plain within the churches?
How else could he have defined it?
Well, he's Jesus.
But I mean, it has to be there. I mean,
No. I don't mean the various teachings. I mean, is it plain? Like, let's imagine Jesus walked in this door and he said, "There's some of you who hold the teachings of whatever." And I might be like, "Who?" Like, what do you mean? Some of us who hold the teachings of, whatever. Go ahead, Blake.
I think it is. I think it is clear and obvious, just maybe not initially. And I think it's clear and obvious to some people more than it is others. Like, some people are a little bit more perceptive than others, and some people, like, whether they're trying to or not, are going to pick up on certain things that are signs of disunity or unity, and so you can kind of tell. Like, I don't know if a visitor would be able to be like, "Are you guys influenced by the Nicolaitans?" But like,
Yeah.
there might be something that somebody says that you're like, "I've heard somebody else say that." So like, you're connecting things that someone said or how someone acts. So like, in one way, you are unifying people in your own head, at least based on your observations. So I think that people probably will be able to tell
Yeah.
in some way.
The reason. I'll let Tim.
I was going to just say, I've experienced something what Blake is talking about. So, the church I went to in Athens, Georgia, there was pretty much you had two options if you wanted to go to a church, that had the name Church of Christ on it. And your two options were one that had, women ministers and, garage band playing, Beatles songs during communion, literally. Or you had our church. So, there were people that would go to services with us, and there were some issues and stuff that they would fall on one side of the aisle, and we would, a lot of other of us would fall on the other side of the aisle. It was kind of obvious. Everyone kind of knew, where people stood, but oddly enough, well, it was kind of not oddly enough, but rather, probably as a blessing more than anything, we still were able to find unity because we all agreed that we needed to follow the Word of God. But you could tell there was a distinction. There were people that sort of would fall on one side of the aisle for certain issues and others that would fall on the other. So, I mean, that's kind of my personal experience with, is it obvious, is it not? If you're a visitor, there's no way you would know. But if you're
Right.
a member of the church, like a member of God's church, you would know, what other stuff is kind of going on. And I don't think that these people were Nicolaitans,
Right.
or something like that. But if you're an active, involved member of God's church, you're going to know where your other brothers and sisters stand on certain issues.
Yeah, and you're going to know what work you need to do to maintain unity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that and mentioned that about these passages, my opinion is when Jesus brings this up, what he's saying is there are some among you who you're not just kind of toying with this intellectually, like you're living it or you're teaching it or you're seeking people to follow you in your teaching or whatever, right? Usually if you're holding on to something that is a demonstrated false teaching, right, you're being led by your flesh or you're being led by something, and you're probably influencing the congregation, right? This isn't like I have a misunderstanding about some doctrine and Tim has a different understanding about some doctrine, and we're seeking to be unified. I don't think that's at all what's going on in this church where there's some who hold to the Nicolaitans. They hold, like, we're in this kind of thing.
This might be kind of a silly example, but like, I think everybody here knows Bill Sanchez. Like, Bill Sanchez and I are united we hate the Yankees. Like, we hate the New York Yankees. You might not, like, be able to tell this initially, but, like, just wait till the subject gets brought up, right? But we are not united in the team we actually cheer for.
Right.
Like, he's a Red Sox fan, I'm a Braves fan. So, like, you can have this one thing you're united, and these other things that you're not so united in, and it doesn't take much to be able to see that. Like, all it takes is, like, the subject coming up, and it's like, you're gonna see both of us go, ugh, like that. You know, that's going to be our reaction to the Yankees. It also doesn't take much to see which team we do cheer for, because he wears so much Red Sox stuff, and I wear some Brave stuff, and so it becomes obvious. And I think that's probably how it is in our lives with what we believe in. I think you're right. I don't think he's just saying some of you guys are kind of wrestling with this inside,
Yeah.
or you've heard this and you're thinking about it. It's like it becomes obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have your hand up?
It did, just thinking, would things be obvious, you think about the church at Sardis in chapter 3, where he says, you have a name,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not the right name, because you're not alive, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
But he also says, a few verses down, that even in Sardis, there are a few who are doing right.
And Sardis was one of the examples I wanted to bring up, where he kind of lays into him pretty quick. You've got this name that you're alive, but you're actually dead. You need to wake up. You need to strengthen. Remember what you received and heard and keep it. If you don't come, I'm going to come like a thief. But then he says, like you said, you have a few people, chapter 3, verse 4. There are a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments. They will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. So there's a divided church where the faithful are outnumbered. And it doesn't seem like they're outnumbered over doctrine. They're outnumbered over apathy, or people who are spiritually dead. They're just, they look alive, right? It's a church that when visitors come, we're talking about visitors and members. That's the easiest way to do it, right? Visitors come and they're like, man, this church, this is it. This is what a church should be and is supposed to be. And what Jesus says is, you've got a name. Everybody thinks you're alive. You're dead. He doesn't mince words. But then he says, among that church that looks alive, there's only a few who are actually worthy, and they're walking with me. Now, he doesn't say this whole church, we know churches aren't saved as a church and condemned as a church. Every one of these letters ends with, he who overcomes, right? Not the church that overcomes. But Jesus doesn't write off this whole church. He tells them, wake up, verse 2, right? He says, you're dead, but you can wake up. You're dead, but you can strengthen the things that remain, which were about to die. I've not found your deeds completed. Okay, well, what that means is complete the deeds. Okay, what other examples of unity, or I guess counterexamples maybe?
Laodicea seemed to be united in arrogance.
Okay, Laodicea was united in a bad way. I know your deeds, verse 15. You are neither cold nor hot. I wish that you were cold or hot. Oh, I got a text from Paulette here. Pergamum's members were united in their suffering. They did not deny the faith even under threats of death. Right. So we've got Laodicea who's united in, I guess, their condemnation. Right? The passive, they're being condemned. Not that they're going around condemning. They're being condemned for being lukewarm. Jesus says, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. You disgust me. It's you say that you're rich, right? And again, he's not singling out individuals. So this church seems to be united, right? the point I'm trying to make here is churches can have problems and have a lot of peace among the members, right? They can be in unity and have serious problems, like to the point that Jesus is going to spew them out of his mouth. I'm done with you, right? But at the same time, the good churches, the examples that we see, they're united and they're doing the right things, right? So you kind of, usually we think, okay, there's the churches that there was nothing good, and there's churches that there was nothing bad. Well, I mean, another way to kind of divide it is, the churches where there was nothing bad, there can't be disunity, right? Or there would be something bad there, right? But then there's churches where if everything is bad, there's also no disunity. So we need to seek unity, but unity must be subservient to something, right? We need to figure out what unity has to be subservient to. What gets sacrificed to maintain unity versus what am I willing to sacrifice unity for? Right? So go back to Sardis. These few, right? Verse 4, chapter 3, verse 4. You have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments. These people were willing to sacrifice their unity with that congregation over something. Right? Then they had to do that. I'm not going to soil my garments just to be part of this group, but I'm going to keep worshiping with this group. That would be hard, right? I mean, if I was writing a letter to these people, I'd say, why don't you move to Philadelphia? Take your family and go. But, I mean, maybe some people did that, I mean, that's what people do today. I'm dissatisfied or whatever, and there's this church who's doing better, I'm going to move. And they really don't have to move their house. They just drive to a different place on Sunday morning, right? Maybe seeking unity. But I think when you read through these letters, it's obvious. What Jesus wants is he wants unity and truth in the church, right? He doesn't laud these churches who are united in their error. He says, well, you know what? I'm really glad that you're all together in this because now I can talk to you all at the same time and get you. I mean, no. It's not a good thing to be united in error, right? Any other things you noticed or wanted to bring up from the 7 churches? Okay. If I go to questions 3. Okay. So with these churches, specifically some of these examples in your head, right? What they were going through, what some of the members were going through, what the churches were like as far as unity and disunity, all right? Can I get someone, you're going to need to use your boomstick. Go around. Can I get someone to read 1 Corinthians 12, 12 through 13? Oh, you're there? All right, go ahead.
1 Corinthians 12, starting verse 12. For even as the body is one, yet it has many members, and all the members of the body, though they are many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, whether Jews or Greeks, whether slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit.
Okay. Someone, Ephesians 4, 1 through 6. Right behind you.
As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling that you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and
and through all and in all.
Okay. Can I get someone to read Philippians 1:27 through 2:4?
Just one thing, as citizens of heaven, live your life worthy of the gospel of Christ. And whether I come and see you or am absent, I will hear about you that you are standing firm in one spirit, in one accord, contending together for the faith of the gospel, not being frightened in any way by your opponents. This is a sign of destruction for them, but of your salvation, and this is from God. For it has been granted to you on Christ's behalf not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for him, since you are engaged in the same struggle that you saw I had, and now hear that I have. If then there is any encouragement in Christ, if any consolation of love, if any fellowship with the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, make my joy complete by thinking the same way, having the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility consider others as more important than yourselves. Everyone should look not to his own interests, but rather to the interests of others.
All right, thanks, guys. Okay, so so after we read those verses, what are some possibilities? I mean, we're not sitting here in judgment of these churches, but we're trying to learn from their example, okay? What are some possibilities for what went wrong in some of the Revelation churches? And you use passages that we just read. Use phrases, use ideas from what we just read. What are some possibilities for what went wrong there?
Go back to the Revelation, first of all, and look at what, I'll go back to the Revelation, first of all, and look at what is said to the church at Ephesus, that you have left your first love. It doesn't say you've lost your love, that you're not actively participating, but that you turned and walked away. So that it is a personal choice is what's going on here amongst individuals in a group.
Yeah, it's not a stumble. They walked away from their first love. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Blake?
So one thing from Ephesians that stood out to me was, he says, verse 2, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. That seems like something that several of the churches struggled with in one way or another. Seems like humility was a problem. Seems like also, this is patience. I'm assuming that's bearing with other brethren, but at the same time, patience can mean just like long suffering. So as the threats and difficulties were coming upon some of the churches, they went away into false doctrine even because of that. So I think you see it in how the people hold to the truth, but you can also see it in how the people carried out how they needed to live, and maybe they were lacking some of the things in Ephesians 4:1 and 2.
Yeah, the humility one I think really stands out because so many times Jesus says, this is what you think about yourself, or this is what people say about you, but here's the reality. You're not there. You're not it. And that's not like you don't have Jesus say that about you as like the first step in error, right? I mean, there's been this progression of where you lost your humility long ago, and maybe you didn't realize it, and now it's manifested itself into this, well, you know what? I am the Christian I need to be. This is the church it needs to be. And who are you to tell me or tell us different? Right? We're alive. How can you come in here and teach us? And Jesus is saying, well, you're not alive. So there's a lack of humility. The patience thing for me is really interesting because when I read these letters, I think, man, these guys have way more patience than I would. I wouldn't still be meeting with that church. I mean, I just wouldn't. Maybe I would out of just ignorance. Maybe the thing that would separate me, let's pretend I'm one of the good Christians, the few, right, in Sardis or whatever. Maybe I just think the difference is nothing. It's just not a big deal to me. I just don't do it, right? But I'm still walking worthy, and maybe the rest of the people in the church aren't, and maybe I just don't think it's a big deal. So then there's no need for me to exercise patience or run to Philadelphia, move or whatever. But I have a hard time believing that. I mean, if you really hold to the Scripture and you hold to Christ, error in the church is going to disturb you a lot. But I don't think that's necessarily the patience that we're talking about. Because there's a church who had patience with Jezebel, right? And Jesus says, I have this against you. You put up with Jezebel. Is that Thyatira? Revelation 2, verse 20. I have this against you. You tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. She teaches and leads my bondservants astray so that they commit acts of immorality. So in Ephesians 4, I don't think it's saying, you know what, when your brethren are in sin, you just be patient. I think it's a different kind of patience, right? It's like patience with trials, or it's, long suffering is toward other people, like you do me wrong. Well, that's different than living in sin. You can do me wrong and you're not necessarily living in sin. I'm going to be long suffering toward you because, you did me wrong and I'm going to forgive you, whatever. But you don't put up, Jesus is pretty clear with Thyatira. You put up with this woman. I have that against you, right? And whether she's a metaphor, allegory, whatever, doesn't matter. They're putting up with something Jesus wouldn't. That's not the patience that we need to have or cultivate. But a brother who's, right, is like struggling with something, well, you know what? You're patient with that brother who's struggling, but you're not encouraging him or overlooking his sin. Kelly had his hand up first, and then Tim. Oh, Tim.
It kind of actually was made, so
Oh, I already did it? I stole it?
you stole it.
Sorry.
I guess I have a question, and this, I don't know what the answer is, so that's why I'm asking it. So in a situation like this, where you have a woman like Thyatira, Jezebel, who needs to be pushed out of the church, how do you think the Christians here who are supposed to respond, the ones whom God is commending, what do you think their course of action was supposed to be in regards to Jezebel, to not tolerate her?
Well, I think it should have been 1 Corinthians 5, that you make it plain to the congregation this is unacceptable, and that this person is being turned over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh so that the spirit may be saved, whatever, right? You say this is leaven in the church and we're going to clean out the leaven. Now, you can't prevent a person from walking in the door and being in the room and being in the building. You can go to court in the United States for that, but I'm just saying in general, if someone's going to come gather with you, they're going to gather with you. But you make it crystal clear, we don't tolerate what she's teaching. This is an acceptable teaching. It's false, right? And so we're going to make sure everyone knows that she is teaching this, and that you need to be aware that you don't fall into that trap, right? It seems like they weren't doing that, because to tolerate means, well, I don't want to say anything against her, or, I don't want to create division. So let's just let her talk and kind of let the leaven spread, and just kind of keep it quiet and keep it tamped down. That's all just from other passages, not necessarily from here. Blake and then Kelly.
In Africa, there was one day where there was a guy who was preaching. He was the one that set up where we were going to go and preach and stuff. And he stood up and started, I think he was doing a lesson, I think it was just a comment during a Q&A session or something like that. And he basically was talking about a local preacher who was dividing people by certain doctrine and certain teachings. And he was very detailed in who he was talking about, but never said his name. And the guy's wife was there apparently, and there was just no holding back, because that's how much that would be uncomfortable for me, but that's how much he cared about pointing out that, hey, you people are asking these questions because this one guy in town is saying these things, and he's too concerned with his fancy suits and all this. Like, everybody knew who he was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found that, I was like, is he talking about somebody that's here? And it turned out he was talking about somebody whose wife was there, and he just didn't care. And I found that refreshing, because it's like, it's not boldness and arrogance, it's calling it what it is because you are concerned about the influence. And
Yep.
that was something that was a minor issue that was being made into a major issue. This is a major issue that people are making into a minor issue in the church of Thyatira. So you have to just call it what it is sometimes, I think.
Yeah, yeah, right. Kelly? He's almost there.
The idea that if the ones who are holding to or tolerating the teachings of Jezebel are the minority, and they are not as upwardly mobile as we are in America to just jump ship and go over to Sardis or wherever, then they are stuck in this situation, and they, no matter what they might say to deter these other people, are going to be the minority and overrule. If they want to gather and meet, then they are pretty much consigned to having to do that. And I think about the idea of, what about Christians in Hollywood? Hollywood is known absolutely for its iniquity, but if they jump ship and move to Georgia, which is the new Hollywood, then what happens with the people that they might have reached, the people who have never known? So there's a yes, if you're the majority and some minority is besmirching the name of Christ, absolutely put them out. But if you're the minority and trying to glorify the name of Christ, then shouldn't you stay? Don't have an answer to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that question has to be answered by individuals. I mean, in their situation, their family, what their abilities are, what their strengths are, that kind of thing. I want to get to our last question, though. Since unity is a characteristic of a collective, right? You can't say Richard has unity. That doesn't make sense. I mean, I do. My hands don't walk off, right?
No duplicity as in James and you.
Yeah. It can't be accomplished by an individual. Like, I can't walk into a group and only on my own volition make that group united. Like, the group has to participate is what I'm saying. Each individual has to participate for a collective to have unity. What can I do as an individual to cultivate unity? And I pointed to Romans 14. I'll go ahead and read that. Romans 14, 15 through 20. For if because of food your brother is hurt, you are no longer walking according to love. Do not destroy with your food him for whom Christ died. Therefore, do not let what is for you a good thing be spoken of as evil, for the kingdom of God is not eating and drinking, but righteousness and peace and joy in the Holy Spirit. For he who in this way serves Christ is acceptable to God and approved by men. So then we pursue the things which make for peace and the building up of one another. Do not tear down the work of God for the sake of food. All things are indeed clean, but they are evil for the man who eats and gives offense. What can I do in a church that cultivates or promotes unity?
One of my favorite songs is called One Voice, and one of the verses says, "This is the sound of all of us singing with love and the will to trust. Leave the rest behind, it will turn to dust. This is the sound of all of us." And you see that in Paul writing in Philippians at the beginning of chapter 2, talking about putting away selfish ambition and looking to esteem others more highly than ourselves. I think focusing on love instead of the things I would like, my preferences, all those things will fade into dust, but love never fades. Love never fails, and I think that seems to be the main idea that Paul expresses.
Yeah, so I'm going to key on one of the things you said from Philippians, which is regarding others as more important than yourself. I think the first step is how we think about each other has to change. I mean, if it's a problem, right? If unity is a problem, or if I'm not part of the group, like I'm not united, well, you know what? How do I think about the people in this room? How do I think about the people that are gathered here? Do I think about these people? Well, I'm just going to say Josh, right? I'm going to pick Josh. Do I think about Josh as someone for whom Christ died? Right there, Josh is a soul that Christ died to save from his sin. Like he bled and died on a cross for Josh. Do I think about Josh that highly? Do I think about him like that? Right? Do not tear down the work of God for the sake of food, verse 20. Do I think about Josh like God is actually, he's got a project going in his garage. Josh is the project. He's working on him every day. And he doesn't make mistakes. He's not having to rework, right? He's doing exactly the right thing with Josh every single day that he wants to do. Do I think of him that way? If I can start thinking about my brethren that way, it becomes really easy to say, okay, they're actually more important than me. God is doing something in them I can't do and they can't do. And what he's doing in them is more important than what I'm doing, period, anywhere in life. If I can start cultivating that within me, that attitude, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to have perfect unity, but if I can start there, it's going to be possible. If I can't get to that point, if I can't view brethren as more important than me, or as a being, an eternal being that Jesus died to rescue from sin, right? Like we're going to, I don't mean eternal backwards, I mean eternal forward, right? We're going into eternity one way or the other, people. So if I can't view people that way, view you guys that way, we can't have unity. I mean, I can't have unity with you. I won't, because I'll be seeking me. Right? Okay, so, I mean, that's like the first step, my attitude. Yeah.
I think the second step is to like put into perspective your own stuff, like your own thoughts. And it seems like in Romans 14, that's the first step is what you said. Think about the people that are your family. Think about the people that you're with. And the second thing is like handle your own stuff. Like, put that aside, check it, put it in check. That's kind of what I see in Romans 14. Like, I think one of the things he said is, verse 16, don't let what is for you a good thing be spoken of as evil. It's like, I think there needs to be some sort of understanding of what is the important stuff and what's not. And not just like what's important for you, but what can we agree on, what unifies us as these are the important things, these are the non-negotiables.
Right.
And if you already have that, then why interject other things into that group that are just your things, and you admit that's not the foundational principles, but they just matter so much that you have to put. Why would you do that?
Right.
Like, you either don't love them as you should. Actually, that's what it is. Because either you love yourself more than them, or you love the things that are your own ideas more than them. So first step, love them like you're supposed to. Second step, put away your own thoughts and things that are just opinions.
Yeah, yeah. And in this context about the eating of meats and things, right, and the foods, Paul isn't saying stop other people from talking bad about your food. That's not what he's saying, right? In verse 16, do not let what is for you a good thing be spoken of as evil. Well, eating meats is good. You can't speak evil. That's not what Paul is saying. Paul is saying the way you wield it in your life, you make other people say evil things about it. You cost the church souls by the way that you use and wield this right to eat meat. So something that for you is a good thing because there's no sin in it, now is spoken of as evil because of what you're doing to the church, right? So like Blake has said, you need to check those things. Anything that's an opinion or that is a right, I'm going to go past opinion, you need to check your rights. You have a lot of rights. Jesus had way more rights than you have. He gave up every right he had. Every single right he had, except the right to the resurrection. That's the only right he claimed. And then after that, he claimed all of his rights, right? The right to the throne, right? The right to give forgiveness to sinners. He has that right. Well, we need to check our rights, right?
So this is like a controversial example, but it's not controversial for this group, so I feel comfortable using it. But like, do we want to be known as people that only think the New King James or the King James is the only inspired translation? Like, we don't want to be known as that kind of group, you know? Say like, so we purge everyone else that is not on board with that, and they won't tolerate our how, persistent we are in saying this is the only one.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we're left with this group that's known as crazy people, because
Right.
and because that's how I think about groups when I hear that. In fact, I was studying with someone the other day, and I just asked her. I was like, "Hey, I've never asked you this, but like, do you only use this specific translation?" She's like, "No, but that's just the one I'm most comfortable with because that's the one that my church uses." I'm like, "Gotcha." And it's not wrong to think that that's the one you want to use.
Right.
But why would you insist on everyone else using only that? That's how you wind up being known as a certain type of group, over something that that everyone can agree on, that Scripture does not say it must be this thing, Like, you can't, I don't care what translation you look in, it won't say this is the only translation,
Right. The translation you're reading is the authority for all time. Yeah.
I think too, just like a historical biblical example, Paul gives us very clearly the right to celebrate holidays if we are so inclined.
Mhm.
And I know Christians, some holidays they do celebrate, some they don't. Some celebrate none at all. Some celebrate every holiday. But I know there was like 7 ecumenical councils in the first 1,000 years of Christianity, where bishops and whatever came from all over Rome and the known world to argue and debate and literally fight each other over when are we supposed to celebrate one particular holiday, Easter. And Easter's not even mentioned in the Bible as a holiday that we were supposed to celebrate. And because of those 7 ecumenical councils, you had the church split 7 times, all because they all wanted to celebrate the holiday on the day that they thought they were supposed to celebrate it. That's a very specific example of the church wielding its authority, or rather, individuals wielding their authority to celebrate holidays and are using it to rip apart the body of God. I mean, just a terrible thing.
Yeah.
And to add to that, like, why do we think the church can celebrate a holiday? Why do we think a church can establish
Right.
any of those? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it just shows how ridiculous it sounds.
Right.
Like, not that we can't acknowledge things, but
Yeah.
to say that my church celebrates this or that, it's like, I don't know.
We celebrate the first day.
Right, I guess. Yeah. But like the specific things that like Tim is
No, I know.
mentioning.
Yeah.
Celebrate Easter every week.
Yeah.
Or how does a church have a stance on an issue that the Bible doesn't speak on?
Right. That's where we've gone past Romans 14 and we've said, okay, it doesn't matter how many people I cost, right? If you don't agree, then you just need to go form your own denomination, because we're going to take a stand on this thing and we're going to be united on this thing, right? Well, that's not just doing without Romans 14. That's going in the opposite direction of Romans 14. That's saying we want division, and the unity that we want is the unity that we create with our mind. And what Jesus is saying is, I've created unity, and you had better not create disunity. Right? Paul is pleading for unity, but he's also saying there is unity. And when you create disunity, you are the problem. Right? So, we're out of time. I'm not going to keep going. That was all my questions. I really did want to end on question 4 because I don't want us to sit back and diagnose churches as being united or not united. I want us to diagnose ourselves as whether or not we can be a part of unity or not. That's the only thing we can affect, is whether or not I can play a role in unity. All right, thanks, guys.